Okay, so we're in for a real treat. I just love what we're about to embark upon. I'm going to be talking with Todd Webb, creator of the Poet comic strip, the ongoing The Poet, which you can find on Substack. It's easy. It's toddbot.substack.com. Or you can just go to his website, toddbot.com, and you can find it there because it's on a navigation bar. But we'll go over that again. Thank you, Todd, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I want to throw in real quick with that information. It's Todd Bot with two D's.
That's
Because
right.
if you do it with one, it's a completely different everything. So
Okay. So yeah, TODD
yeah.
bot.com. And I'll have something on the screen to show folks. So
Oh,
no
cool.
worries on that end. I'm going to let me ask you first. Can you just give us a description of what the poet is about?
Um, it's about a poet who goes to the park to write poems and generally just ponders creativity in general and is constantly kicked down a notch by a feisty pigeon that hangs out at the same park. And then when neither of them are around, the park bench that the poet sits on will ruminate about something also.
All
It's
right.
pretty, it's very basic, three characters, almost like a stage play setting.
Well, I'm tempted to just share with you what I'm looking at. I know where I want to go with the interview. I want to like dissect or talk about the comic strip and how you found your place in it. Let me switch cameras, and I might need to edit this as I because it might take a second. Sometimes it works just fine. There we go. There we go.
That's cool. I have no idea how to do that.
Well, it's basically just an additional camera. They're not that expensive really, and then you find a way to prop it up. And if you do it just so, it has like this magical segue. Because some people who use them, it takes them a while to set it up, and then you think, well, wow, this is too clunky. And so I took a moment to look over some of the comic strips, and I wanted to find some good examples. And this will lead to some of my questions. Like I'll try to recite this one. In order to write poetry, one must love the world. It's not easy when the world can be so unlovable. And I think that's magical because it's timeless, and at the same time it's relevant because we are living in, well, in a nutshell, problematic times, I guess, depending on your viewpoint.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that was written in 2020 too, so there was all kinds of
Oh yeah.
outside elements roiling.
Yeah.
So
And then I was thinking about your comic strip, and so he has a main character who's a poet. Gee, if I were to do that, then I would feel the pressure to come up with poetry. And actually, when I'm just sitting by myself, many times I'll just write stuff in my notebooks, and it's fun. I don't even think about it. But if you start to think about it too much, am I writing poetry? But and it naturally happens. Is what I'm getting at with your comic strip. Like in this one, turn the mind's jungle into a garden. And this is, I guess, after you start to get on a roll. Am I onto something with thinking that?
yeah, I I I have an Instagram artist friend named Micah Lexier up in Canada, and he always posts pictures of like piles of stuff that he'll find on the street or whatever with the caption, "The best sculptures aren't really sculptures." And I
Hmm.
think that works with poetry too. Like the best poems aren't really poems. It's just like a thought or
Hmm.
something simple. But if you isolate it on a page and think about it, it means more.
Well, I love poetry, and I actually took a couple of classes just on uh, poetry, along with the surveys of English literature. And at the end of the day, you just you just do it. And here's another good example. The the poet is just observing life, just soaking it all in, and then the pigeon. Do I even want to know what you're doing up there? When the image is new, the world is new. And I'll just do a few more.
Sure. Forgot about him standing on the bench. I should do that again.
Yeah, it's interesting how the pigeon, a creature from nature, is is the skeptical one and keeps bringing the poet down a notch. What if you made something and nobody likes it? Are you ever scared of failing? We all fail at something eventually. The only real failure is not trying. So there's the poetry and philosophy. It's like I think you just got on the rolls. I guess I'm curious. Did you did you just know it was going to come together, or how did it start for you?
It's a little bit of a long story. In the book you're flipping through, if people get it in the afterward, I kind of go into more detail about it. But there was a real poet that inspired me to make a comic about him. Um, and his name was Robert Lax. He was American, but he lived the last half of his life in Greece. And he wrote these very tiny, minimalist poems, like right down the middle of the page, about very small things like rain and the ocean and wind. And I really liked them. And I had done a couple of other short books about real people using their writings as the basis. I have a book about Catherine Mansfield, and I had done a short story for Illustoria magazine about Georgia O'Keeffe, and I was working on something about Ray Johnson, and I wanted to do something about a poet, and I thought it was going to be like a short 48 page book, maybe 80 pages, usually like the longest I do. And when I had the idea, and then lockdown happened, I was doing all these other daily projects already, and I figured, well, I'll just do a page a day of this poet story. And at the time, it was called Robert of Patmos, since that's where he lived. And and then it'll be done in a couple of weeks if I just throw up a page a day on the internet, and then I'll have a book. Um, and I figured I would use the single page format to tell the story, so it was like an accumulative thing, using the structure of a daily strip, not actually doing a daily strip, but just like that idea of four panels, four panels, four panels, and then after 80 pages, you've got the story of he goes down and writes a poem and goes home. And as I was trying to design the character, I was having all these issues. I just couldn't get it to look right, and I borrowed the big sausage nose thing from Patrick McDonald, who draws mutts, and I'd never put a big nose on a character before, and I'm like, oh, okay, that works. And then I was trying to design the other characters, which the real guy being on Patmos in Greece, there was like fishermen and cats, like stray cats in all the pictures. And so I was just going to have him talk to fishermen down at the ocean, and maybe a stray cat or two. And I'm like, but his poems were so minimal, I wanted the cast to be small. So I'm like, okay, no fishermen, just the cats. And then I was trying to design cats, and it's like, oh, there's too many cartoon cats already. The world doesn't need another cartoon cat, at least not for me. So maybe I'll make it a seagull. And so then there was a seagull and Robert. But then the beach setting was like too much of nothing. And so I said, oh, what if I make it a park bench that he writes at instead of like by the ocean? But then it would have to be a pigeon instead of a seagull. And then it's not Robert Lax at all. It's just a poet. So
Hmm.
then I changed it. And at this point in my mind, it was still just going to be a book. Um, but then it was going to be called The Poet, the Pigeon, and the Park Bench.
Hmm.
And then here in Virginia, there's a comic show called Noise in Norfolk. And I usually try to do a mini comic for that show every year. And so I said, oh, I'll do the first handful of pages as a mini comic, and then I can roll it out daily till the book is done. But when I put the mini comic together, that title was too long, so I chopped it down to just the poet.
Oh, wow.
Um, and then I put those first 7 pages on Instagram and started doing a page a day, thinking I was just working towards this short book. But about um, I don't know, 20 pages into it, it felt like it was an actual comic strip instead of just something taking the form of a comic strip. Um, and eventually, I was getting close to 100 pages and I didn't feel like I was done. So I said, okay, I'll just see if I can do it for a year. Um, and if it's still giving material, um, I'll go longer. So I hit a year and then I said, okay, I'll try for 5 years. Um, and then I passed 5 years. So now I'm shooting for 10, which is
Mm.
how long Calvin and Hobbes ran. And
Mm.
if I get to 10 and still feel like there's more to say, I'll just keep going. But
Oh, wow.
it's completely an accident, but it's one I was kind of slowly building towards for my entire life, I think, because it's what I wanted to do when I was a little kid.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if this book still exists. It was The Magic of, or The Secrets of Making Comic Strips, Cartooning, something like that by Ken Muse. You remember Ken Muse? Is that
Yeah.
name? It doesn't ring
Is
a.
that the is that a British book?
Oh, I always thought of it as American. It might be British, but he had a system down where he said you got to create like a dozen, at least a dozen comic strips and keep mailing them out. And man, it would be just too much. You can't. I don't know. I guess it's a system that might work, especially when you were aiming at being syndicated. But
Hmm.
I think the system that works is you take a long pause and figure out and it's organic. It happens in the process of making something. So
Hmm.
if you start to your heart and soul starts to be and in tune with what you're doing, that's probably the
Yeah.
best way to do it.
The other thing with this project for me, the thing that made it possible is that somehow this combination of characters was able to hold like every idea I have. Which over, I've done comics for 25 something years, and every book is different with different characters and different settings. And I never knew how to do a comic strip that would keep going. I had done a diary comic years ago for like a decade, and that was the closest I came to a strip thing. But it was all real, so I didn't have to make anything up. But I didn't know how to do a continuing daily comic strip, even though that's what I always wanted to do. And I think doing all those other books kind of helped me um, figure a way, like what I was interested in, like the kind of stuff I was interested in. And then when I was doing this, it really somehow, like I had been working on a book that was passed on by Random House, like a children's series, but that had a bear and a bird in it and was also, more thoughtful, um, quiet kind of stories. And I think that the germs of these two characters were in there, um, and kind of transmogrified into this project, um, with a bunch of other stuff. Because, like I said, I haven't done any other books really since I started the Poet in 2020. Even
Mm.
though I had a whole bunch of other stuff going at the time, this just kind of took over, and I love it. So I hope it keeps going.
Yeah, you're definitely on the right track. Well, I think if you wanted to do it, any kind of book for young readers, I think it'll just organically happen. Because you're just in command of what you're doing right now.
Thanks.
So I'll just do a few more. The smell of fresh rain on the sidewalk, pink blossoms upon the lawn. This landscape is an unfinished conversation. All I smell is dead worms. And again, it's a poem without having to try too hard, and of course the pigeon knocks the poet down a few pegs.
But the pigeon's statement makes it feel more like a poem, I feel like.
Yes, yes. As I read that last line, I was thinking that. Here's another good one. They're all great. I just wanted to, I think I was trying to, I don't know what I was thinking. I instinctively chose these random pages. Life isn't a straight line from start to finish. It tends to circle around like a poem. Donuts are circles. Is food all you ever think about? Life is a donut. Yeah, if you think about it, they could all be poems. A good many of them.
That's a secret bonus to calling it the poet,
Yeah.
I guess. Our brains turn them into them.
Well, I thought it was important to just dive in and show some real samples because if people who have never uh, tried to pull it out, they just need to see it and then they get it. Oh, okay, now I get it. Just like if someone had never seen Peanuts, which you would think it'd be impossible, but little kids have never seen some little kids never seen Peanuts. You have to
Yeah,
just
it's
show them.
crazy.
Yeah. I walk in the woods, the last wild place around. I could spend all day out here among the trees. Trees always have something new to say. When's the last time you talked to someone that's not a bird or a tree? Yeah, yeah, that really resonates with me as it should resonate with anyone. I mean, you really, you're gonna, your best memories will be memories where you're communing with nature one way or another.
hmm that's another one I feel like that was I guess we were venturing back outside by August, but a lot of us had been inside forever, so it was like when it's the last time I talk to somebody that's not,
Yeah.
my wife or my cat or just like a squirrel outside.
Well, I wanted to ask you just some, I guess, what would I say, theoretical type questions or shop type questions. Well,
Sure.
how would you describe, say, to a space alien, what a comic strip is? Or what are the characteristics of a comic strip?
Who a comic strip in particular. Let's see. It's serialized,
Hmm.
um, usually in a daily format. So you get one installment per day. They're usually short. They're usually funny. They don't have to be. Um, and there's recurring characters and situations um, that can build up to a bigger picture, but they don't have to.
Hmm.
Uh, what else? Um, Usually, well, when they were created as a form of advertising for a dying print medium known as newspapers. And so they had a designated space to live in where people would expect to see them, and they were disposable, so they're not meant to be saved. So binding them in fancy books is an anachronism, uh, but I'm glad it happens. And yeah, they're regarded as one of the lowest art forms on Earth, as I'm explaining to an alien. And maybe slightly above poetry, which makes a comic strip about poetry like even lower than both of them combined. Um, which means there's no pressure.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think that's it. Cast of characters, place where things happen. Yeah. Oh, and yeah, word balloons.
When I started to think about it, had the task of writing a review, some kind of review of the poet for my blog. I couldn't help but want to try to explain what a comic strip is. And I started to think about other things like why are people attracted to comic strips? Because well, one of the main things I think is because it's familiarity, because you have ongoing characters, ongoing storylines, and it comes
hmm
out daily, for goodness sake. Now that is a very interesting aspect of comic strips. There's no way around it. I mean, you could do them like 3 days a week. You could, but you still want to keep
There's
a
weeklies and
routine.
monthlies, but yeah.
You still want to keep a routine because you want to keep the fans uh, with a new a delivery system that works. But
Hmm.
a daily would be the ideal way to do it, of course. And I did it in college, and I loved it. And I kept trying to get like 2 or 3 weeks ahead of myself. That's what
Uh-huh.
the old cartoonists would do. And so
It's a
I just
challenge, yeah.
I learned so much from the process. And then sitting back and listening to people as they commented on the comic strip and trying to be provocative at times. Although
Uh-huh.
that's one aspect of comic strips. I guess for some particular comic strips, especially like Doonesbury or Bloom County or the Boondocks, it doesn't happen in the poet necessarily. I don't think you try to be provocative, or do you?
I try to comment on current events in a way that in some ways anybody can read and think that I'm on their side, you know?
Yeah.
You got to kind of walk that tightrope so that you're not I don't want to directly offend anybody even if I am against their stance on an issue. Um so yeah, I think it's quietly subversive.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the strips will be me reacting to some current event, but I'll try to make it in a way that's much smaller and sillier. So it may mask what I'm actually talking about. So it could be read as just a regular interaction, but to me, when I read it, I know like that's about this thing and that's about this thing. Um, like the one about the that you showed first about the world being uh, a tough place to be in. Um, I can't remember what the exact two panels were, but you have to love the world when the world can be unlovable or something like that. And that was a depressing day for me.
Hmm.
Um, but trying to give the characters the feeling like that, but then show them, they're together and there is things to love in the world always.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's I try to spin it in a way that can help us digest things and move forward instead of being frozen by fear, indecision,
Hmm.
that kind of thing.
Well, I thought one really sweet observation that was made on a different show you were on was that folks love looking forward. They look forward to their comic strip and getting that dose of humor, and so it's something precious that people enjoy as part of their lives.
Hmm. That's why I like the pivot. I'm trying to pivot to the Substack just because I like that daily delivery method where it pops up for them in the morning,
Yeah,
in the middle of all their other stuff. So it's just like a comic strip, and then move on to everything else. I really like that idea. It mimics the newspaper system a lot better than posting it on social media, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. Brandon Lehman comes to mind. He likes to do it on Instagram, and it
Hmm.
seems to work for him. And it seems to just organically work for him to do it on that format, and it seems to work for you on Substack in a very organic way.
Yeah, I've started it on Instagram and I still post it on there, but since the way the algorithms keep changing, um, I've got thousands of followers on there, but only like 30 people see the strip every day.
Yeah, that's
So it,
interesting.
so moving it over to a place where if they sign up to get it, they're gonna get it really
Yeah,
is important to me. That it's like um, it builds that into their daily routine,
yeah,
like you were saying, which I think is important. Like you want to feel like you know the characters, and then that gives the authors permission to do slightly longer stories every once in a while and not have to recap every day. Like, well, this is what you missed.
yeah. So do you have like extra stuff if you become a paid subscriber, or how does it work for you?
No, I wish I could lower the price to $1 for a paid subscription. the lowest that they let you do, I think, is $5 for a month.
Oh.
Um, and I set it so that it's $5 a month. I mean, it's free, or $5 a month, or there's a $30 for a year support, and I just use that because that's what the year collections cost. Like the
Mm.
books, I charge $30 for those, so
Yeah.
um, that seems like a kind of equivalent price, and it's just like there's no extras that I like. I haven't been able to think of anything super cool. For the first couple of months, I had it so that only paid people could comment, um, but then nobody was commenting, so I just opened it up to everybody, and now there's a couple of people that comment every day, and that's nice. It's building a little community vibe. Um, if I could think of something really cool to do as a perk, I would. But really, it's so time consuming to produce the strip, and then
I know.
I've self published too, so having to package the books and everything. I don't have anybody to do layouts or editing or marketing or publicity of any kind. I have to do everything, so uh,
Hmm.
it's a lot when there's a daily strip involved. So just trying to maintain my lead on the strips alone is the trickiest part.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I was thinking, uh, boy, the stumbling block would be trying to create extra stuff. But people, I think, okay, they understand. It's like a Patreon. You're just helping to keep this engine going along.
Yeah, I had a Patreon, and the problem was like people. I didn't know why people were following me because I do so many things, especially before starting the poet. I did a lot of different projects, and so I didn't know how people were finding me. If they were finding me from like pop culture art that I had done with a gallery, or if they were finding me from comic books, or from magazine stuff, or writing things, or music. I still do music, but I used to be a touring musician, so I was a lot more active. And like people would find me from all these different ways, and I was trying to think like, what can I do in this single place that would cover all those bases? And I ended up making like videos just for them, and I nobody ever watched them. I put all this work into like editing them, and the people that were being kind enough to support me wouldn't even watch the videos. So I'm like, well, why are you giving me money to make these videos? Um, so then I switched over to Substack and just invited everybody there to follow me because, I do all these other things, but I've always thought of myself as a cartoonist first. So really doing the daily strip was, it's like being finding your house in the middle of the forest and being like, oh, okay, I made it. Um,
Oh.
so it's nice to just be doing that. And uh, so like the paid tier thing, like I haven't figured that out, and I just kind of have it as an option if people like it and feel like supporting that way. That would be great. But for the same amount of money, they could just order one of my books of the strip and then have it physically, which is almost better. But with the paid tier, it's nice because theoretically, if enough people do it, then it would be giving me a regular income to help support me while I sit at my drawing board and come up with comics forever, which
Yeah.
is the ultimate goal, to just do that and not have to focus on all the other stuff to survive. But
Oh, I know.
yeah, but free
Yeah.
is great. Sign up for free.
Uh, yeah, I've got a ton of questions. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. I think we're having a good time, so
Oh, I'm
I'll
fine. Yeah, I cleared the day for you.
oh,
I'll talk as long as you need me to.
well, I wanted you to maybe talk a little bit about how you got started, because I think a lot of young people find it like it's just something they want to do, a comic strip, and then it might be like overwhelming. Well, how do I go about it? I can say from my vantage point, back in the 80s, I was interested in writing and painting, all sorts of stuff, and I still am. But I mentioned the comic strip uh, plan, and there was this one guy. I worked at an art supply store, and he was like somebody he'd seen it all, and he it was his mission to burst my bubble. And so he called me back into the back room and he said, "So, what's your plans for the future?" Well, I kind of think a comic strip. Go to Disney
Uh,
and paint Mickey Mouse's pants, or but do something like that. But a comic strip, never gonna work, never. And I just thought I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do what I want to do. I understand where you're coming from, but I guess if it really speaks to you, that's that kind of stuff, even from an authority figure, it's not going to burst your bubble or an art professor.
oh yeah,
And especially today, there's so many ways to go about it. A lot of the stump roadblocks have been taken away these days.
yeah. The downside for comic strips is the system for doing them as a career has evaporated um, over time, and that's the challenge for doing one now. Is it's like, you know, I was talking with Patrick McDonald, and uh, he said I don't even know what to say about how to do anything further than what you're doing with the poet because um, it might not make a difference now. Like there's like it's like pursuing syndication was something I would have done 20 years ago if I had the idea back then. Um, but now I don't know what the real advantage to that would be because it would just end up on another website, you know?
Hmm.
Um, like the odds of it actually being printed and distributed in the shrinking newspaper market um, is just getting smaller and smaller. So I haven't even tried to pursue it, even though I'm confident. I think I could sell it to a syndicate if I wanted to, but then um, it's also just adding an extra level of middlemen to the tiny margin of money that I'm able to eke out from
Hmm.
doing them. So yeah, it's a weird time for comic strips in particular. Um, I'm sure they'll bounce back in some way once some unknown some unknown delivery method emerges. But um, yeah,
Well, I guess
tricky.
if you were to pursue syndication, it would be online, and
Yeah,
then
which it already is.
you have to wonder how much money are you really going to get, and then how much control
Hmm.
are you going to lose?
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Because I don't think, see, I like to design the books themselves. And that's another thing I struggle with is like if I gave the strip to a syndicate, then they would want to publish it through their publishing arm and they would want their people to design them and they wouldn't let me make the books look the way that I want them to look necessarily. I mean, they might, but to them, I would just be like a low guy on the totem pole and they'd say, "Well, we've got professionals to design the books. We've been doing it for 100 years, which is great, and some of those books look delightful. But I think uh, I like being able to put that amount of thought into the package of the actual thing too. So it's
Hmm.
self-publishing all the way for me. I think at this point in time, like unless somebody wants to take over just the physical printing for me.
Well,
Um,
everything is so easy for you to do yourself these days. The
yeah,
publishing, the distribution. So, what's
yeah. What's the part? The perk?
I guess the perk by being picked up by a publisher is still maybe prestige if it's the right publisher. If it's a big advance, that's nice.
Yeah,
And especially if it's the publisher you really develop a relationship with,
yeah.
maybe that counts for a lot. Um, I love comic strips. I keep dabbling in them, but I have yet to do something. I'm getting there. I start projects and I set them aside, but there's one that I'm slowly it's taking on a life of its own, and maybe a year from now. But it's not like I feel like Ahab to try to catch Moby Dick. I don't really care if a comic strip becomes super big for me, but I love doing them. I
That's the reason to do them.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the only reason to do them is
yeah. I
because you
love
love it.
art in general. I think
Hmm.
that's probably what I was trying to tell that guy in the back room at that art supply store. That I just love making art. But he's uh, so
No,
I've gravitated over the years totally. It's like I almost feel like I had to abandon a focus on comic strips to do graphic novel work. And
that's
so
what happened to
I
me.
have been picked up by one publisher that I do enjoy. And this new project I'm working on might go to that publisher and or it may go somewhere else, but I love the work. So I wanted to ask you, this
Hmm.
is kind of like maybe a question that's out of left field, but do any interesting thoughts might come to mind about comparing the comic strip world with the graphic novel world, that the processes involved? Would you ever do a graphic novel, or would you say, well, I'm doing
I've
one,
done
Henry?
I've done a ton of them in the past. I think I've got a ton of books out there, all self-contained, on the shorter end, but still, graphic novels, 100 pages.
They still
Um,
qualify as graphic novels.
yeah, and it is it is different for me, the process of doing one of those, because for those, like I did a book called Tuesday Moon, and I had to it at the time that I did it. There was a weird deadline with a printer where there was some kind of discount on full color comics, which were still hard to get back then, in smaller quantities. And if I finished it by that date, I could get a whole bunch of them for like really low cost. And so I'm like, I'd been thinking about the book for a while. So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to do it. But in order to do it, had to write the book, because you have to know with a graphic novel project, you have to know where it's going. It has to have a beginning, a middle, and an ending. And whereas comic strips are open ended, so every strip itself has a beginning, middle, and an ending, but they build up on each other over time. So
Hmm.
the thing itself doesn't have an ending until the cartoonist decides to end it, like Bill Watterson did with Calvin and just had that last strip that he planned out, or until they, you know, they lose their health and pass away, like what happened with Schultz, and he didn't really get to end it. It's just ran out the strips he did in advance, um, and then that was it. Or you know something worse than that happens, I think, which is when the cartoonist dies and the syndicate owns the strip and just keeps it going forever and handing
Hmm.
it off to new people, and it always just becomes some other weird zombie strip. Um, which that stuff doesn't happen with graphic novels, but the self-contained nature of them is what I like about them, but it's also the thing I struggled with the most for a long time, was the writing of that kind of thing. Like I had tons of ideas for things, and lots of them were just abandoned because I couldn't figure out where they were going. And some of them I even started, like I did in the early 2000s. I had a book called Another Bum Kick that I was working on that was inspired by the beat writers in New York in the 50s. But it was a bunch of animal characters, because they were fun to draw. And I drew like 80 pages of it, and then was like, I don't know where this is going, and just stopped. And that's happened a lot over my time doing comics. Um, and then so stumbling into the poet system of the way that I write those, um, that also happened concurrently. I had optioned a TV show and was writing that, and it was like a crash course in screenwriting. And I learned from doing that at the same time as the poet stuff, and I had revived my journal club, so I was doing all this stuff at the same time. And something about that system of like, with the TV show, having to like, you pitch a sentence summary for like the story, and if they like that one, then you expand it, and then you expand it again into an outline, and then you write the the actual script. And I really enjoyed it. Like, which was the thing I was the most scared of, was it's like, you have ideas for a show? Yeah, I come up with ideas for things, sure. and then being told, okay, we like it now, like write write a bunch of them for us. And it was kind of terrifying because I'm like, shoot, now I have to write for real. And but it unlocked this switch in my brain of something that I now really enjoy. And while I was doing the poet stuff, I figured out all of that at the same time of like the way my particular brain can figure out from the A to B situation. Um, Now that I know how to do it for myself, it works. I think it's different for everybody, but yeah, that whole the process side of it, I really love. I always loved making the things, but figuring out ways around writing a story was something that I did for a while. Was like I did a book called Chance Operations, where it was all um, indeterminate comics made out of random words and random pictures and put together with random color combinations chose by flipping a coin and asking questions. And I liked it because I wouldn't have made any of those comics. But also it was a way to produce comics without having to do all the mental work of like, what's it about? you know?
Yeah.
Um, and with a graphic novel, you really do have to kind of do that. And with a daily strip, you have to do it, but it's on a much smaller level that I feel is better suited to what I kind of how my brain works. Like now, I could never when I was a kid and a teenager and I wanted to do a comic strip, I could never figure out, well, how do you come up with an idea every single day? That seems impossible. And and it really just has to be like the characters have to be capable of making something out of any idea you give them. So like anything that you're interested in, um, like movies, television, music, plays, sculpture, origami, you know, napkins, silverware. Like I'm just associating random stuff. Carpentry, like any of those subjects. If you're like, I need to have something to say today. Um, what do I like? And then give it to your cast and see what they do with it. And I think that's the trick to having it generate all the time, which is different than in a graphic novel where like they all the characters all serve a specific purpose to you're telling a
Yeah.
defined narrative. Whereas in comics it's more loose. It's like as long as you get the thought across, and maybe get somebody to chuckle or something, then it's like, okay, mission accomplished. What's tomorrow? So there's always tomorrow to worry about.
So that's a great way to add to the definition of what a comic strip is. It reaches that transcendent level where it can be about anything.
Yeah,
Even if it's specifically about a poet, it could really it could end up being about anything.
yeah, and that's for me with him. It's fun because the one of the jokes with the setup is that he's interested in things that the pigeon thinks is like the most boring things that you could think of. So when the poet's writing a poem, it's I try to think like what's something that would drive the pigeon crazy if he's like, "What are we doing today?" And he's like, "Oh, you know, I'm comparing these two colors of moss, or something." So like whatever random thing I could think of, and then it's like, okay, there I can get something there. And sometimes I'll research stuff, um, and learn all these insane facts about silly things like fire hydrant colors and their meanings and um, stuff like that. And it'll give me 4 or 5 days worth of material just because of a random thing. But I'm able to give it to them and they'll it'll go. Sometimes it'll go off in an unexpected way where the pigeon is the one who's more thoughtful than the poet is or whatever. But yeah, it's super fun and it's super weird. It's weird how that works. But I think with comic strips, that's kind of the way that and it's different for everybody, but I think that that's the common element is like the characters that lived the longest and had the most to say were characters that the cartoonist could just take anything from existence and be like, here guys, do something with this, and they'll do it.
Yeah, that brings to mind what are considered the greatest examples of comic strips like Crazy Cat, because they could do that. Peanuts, of
Yeah,
course. Nancy, of course.
yeah, Nancy, one of my favorites, and Bushmiller famously just had um like a plunger. That was like his joke was like, if I don't have an idea, I always have a plunger. That'll give me yeah, that'll give me something.
Did you see
Um,
or did you read Bill Griffith's book on Nancy?
oh, it's fantastic. Yeah, it's really good.
Well, that's what got me down a deeper researching on Nancy, and it is beyond remarkable it uh, 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 how it managed to be universal anywhere in the world. Nancy's
Hmm.
recognized. I think the new Nancy, I've seen it a few times, more than a few times, and actually it surprises me. It's still really good. It's a little different though. So
Hmm.
it's like you're tweaking. The whole idea is to keep Nancy universal, and like it's just a joke. And if you add a little bit more, it does tilt the balance.
Hmm. Yeah, Nancy's definitely a gag strip over uh, characters. Like they don't really have personalities; they represent things in Nancy,
Yeah, yeah,
um, which separates it from Peanuts, or something
yeah.
like that, where the characters act a certain way.
Hmm.
Like Nancy's only trait, character wise, is she's hungry all the time, and Sluggo's is that he's poor, and that's it. Like there's nothing else to them because they just represent these concepts.
Exactly.
Uh,
That's what Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David always said about Seinfeld. You're not going to get feelings from Seinfeld. It's supposed to be broad.
right.
It's supposed to be
Yeah.
broad.
Yeah. It's funny how that works, and it's like there's so much variety within such a what you'd think is such a tight like pinpoint of a concept, but it's neat.
Well, I kind of feel like I need to apologize for not knowing all of your body of work. I
It's
thought
fine.
I knew some of it, but there's so much more.
Oh,
And
there's a ton of nonsense.
well, it's very impressive. You're definitely somebody who continues to just be an artist, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it.
Sure, I'll take that.
And so
I'll
I
I'll
was thinking, how's he going to respond to that? Oh, sure.
I'll accept it.
Well, that's the terrible thing that young people should always go ahead. You can call yourself, just
I
become
always
an
tell people
artist
I'm a
instead of trying to call
cartoonist. Yeah.
yourself one. Instead of worrying whether you are an artist, just be an artist. Just make things.
Hmm. Yeah.
Ah,
Anybody
there
that
you
makes
go.
things. Yeah. Yeah. Accurate.
Well, I'm going to round it out to so we'll do like an hour. We just have a few more minutes left, and that way you'll
Okay.
feel like okay, we have a goal. Henry's not going to go on forever. I'm looking at my questions. I was a number seven on my list was how about Crazy Cat as the all-time greatest comic strip? We covered that. Number eight would have been, would you agree that comic strips and graphic novels are very different animals? We covered that.
Yeah.
Um, you see, now you're getting to see how the sausage is made. Can you share with us some? So you see, I'm asking him like in a natural way, but then I do have my script. Can you share with us some of your creative journey? Yeah, we covered that. And then I also had, what do you see as the future of comic strips? Now, that's a very
Yeah.
what's
That's
his name? What's the name of
Scott
the guy?
McCloud.
Yeah, a Scott
That's for
McCloudian
Scott.
question.
Yeah. It's
So
Scott
I
on the
think the
line.
future of comics is maybe Substackian.
I think so. I think there's a lot of potential for comics on Substack, and I don't know why there's not more there. And I say that in the back of my mind. I'm like, it's probably better for me that there's not a lot there right now, so that I
Hmm.
can get those people that are looking for comics. But if you're doing something serialized in any way, I do think that that's even though it's kind of an archaic system, it's basically just a newsletter. um, which we had all moved past newsletters, and now we're it's like, oh, that works. And blogs, I feel like blogs are going to come back in like a year or two, probably. Um,
Oh my
but
goodness.
like
Don't get
for
me
me,
started.
yeah, like yeah, for real, you're leading the way. See, I think they're going to be back in a big way. But and my goal, I have a couple of cartoonist buddies that we talk almost weekly, and uh, one of the things I keep bringing up with them is like I'm my focus for this year is to get my website back up to where it is the central hub for finding all of my stuff. I mean, it never went away, but I don't really add new things to it very frequently,
Hmm.
um, and I'm trying to get slowly fit in time to like add things to the archive on that and build out so that that will be the place because it's the only thing that's um, for my own work that's been there, since like 1998. It's still there, and I think as all of these fads that we've gone through over the past 20 years, as the internet started and grew up, and I guess it's in its rebellious teenage years now, where everything is chaotic and
Hmm.
noisy. I think people are going to start sliding back to that idea of like less centralized, where everybody's going to one place to find everything, and more of
Hmm.
like, well, I like these 10 people and I'm going to check their things every day and then I'm going to
Hmm.
get off. and
Yeah.
um and
Wow.
I miss that, but I kind of think that it's a result of the way things have gone with different social media platforms, where we had MySpace for a minute, and then Facebook, and then Instagram and Twitter, and one by one they all fall. It's like we all go and get on them, and we're like, this is the greatest thing ever, and then it gets taken over by corporations, and then the thing that we all liked about it slowly dies, and then
Hmm.
it's like, oh, here's a new one over here. Let's go over here.
Hmm.
I think we're getting to a point where everybody's kind of tired of that, and it'll start going back to what we liked about the internet. As long as the internet stays a place where we could do that and have our personal space, I think it'll go back towards that. And I think for comics, that will be a big shift of like, um, and maybe the newsletter form is the first phase of that, of like building up a way to reach people through their inboxes, um, and then have your own landing page that people can go to for everything else, instead of sending them to, well, this is my Instagram handle, which is owned by somebody that's not me,
True. Yeah.
who profits off of stuff that I put on there for free, and stuff like that. I think it, somehow online comics, it's gonna, I don't know. Scott would say this much more eloquently than I am,
Oh,
but but yeah, I
I
think
love
I
your
think there's going to
answer.
be a shift.
It gives us all hope because without getting political, really, I can say without saying it, I like the idea that we're in our teenage rebellious stage on the internet where there's all this chaos and noise.
Yeah,
We have a lot of years ahead of us, centuries. Who knows how long we have before it all goes. And
yeah.
so we
It's
have plenty
still
of time to figure it out.
it's still new, I mean, you and I
Yes,
remember a time before any of this existed, when our phones were attached to the walls. So
yes.
like, um, it's still very new, and the rate of growth was, uh, almost overwhelming, and it shows. Like, because we don't know how to handle the fact that everybody's connected all the time now.
Hmm.
And there's going to be some kind of shift. And I don't know what it is, but I do think it's going to slow down and step back, I think, and be more, at least the stuff that really matters, I think will be things where it's like we have to go and seek it out again, instead of just go to one place and hope that the robots show us something we like.
Hmm.
you know
Yeah, I
yeah,
keep searching for the most authentic. It used to be that we always look back 20 years, but I think now we're looking back 100 years.
Hmm.
because there's so much interest in the 1920s. So we are. How did everything go wrong? What we were more human, we were more impulsive, more uh, less cautious in ways, more authentic. Where did things go wrong? And so we keep looking back, which is good. At least
Yeah.
some of us do.
Yeah.
That's my
Depends
sly
on,
way of saying more without saying everything.
yeah, that you're doing the poet tight walk,
Yeah.
tightrope walk.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm going to let you go, but I feel terrible about saying goodbye, so hopefully we'll do this again.
Anytime. Yeah. I'm always 90% of the time I'm in this room just working on comics and stuff. So
Oh, me
uh
too. Me
hit me up
too.
whenever.
And there's lots of similarities and overlaps about our working process. I notice we both like to have a lot of stuff, and it just we need it. We need it. You need to be able to
Well,
grab a book. You need to be able to grab a figure, whatever it is.
I have everything in the studio room so that it's not overtaking the rest of the condo for
There you
my
go.
wife's. So the rest of our house is nice and clean, and it's organized in here. But like all of what I like, all my fun stuff is all in this little 10 by 10 cube. So it looks busier than it really is. But I do love everything. Like I said, like art, stuff to look at, original art pages and books and stuff. It's like you need it.
Yeah, we call this the art room.
Yeah, this is my fun room.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Todd.
Cool. Thank you so much. This was fun.